University Press Audiobooks presents World War II, a Chelsea House title. Written by Maurice Isserman. General Editor John S. Bauman. Narrated by Brett Barry. This audiobook is based on the revised edition of the book published by Chelsea House Publishers, an imprint of Info-Base Publishing. Preface. World War II was the greatest and most costly conflict in the history of humanity. It redrew the political map of Europe and Asia. It transformed the United States and its wartime ally, the Soviet Union, into superpowers and laid the groundwork for the conflicts of the Cold War that would shape international affairs for the next 4.5 decades. Like all major wars, its impact reached far beyond the realm of its military and diplomatic outcome, for it set in motion far-reaching social, cultural, and political changes. World War II is, without question and deservedly, the most closely studied event of the 20th century. That is not to say, however, that there is any consensus as to how the war should be regarded these many years later. For many Americans it is and has always been the good war, a high and holy cause whose righteousness was enshrined in the shining victory of 1945. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, commander of Allied military forces in the European theater of the war, would entitle his 1948 memoir of the war years Crusade in Europe. Others, including some veterans of the war, are more skeptical. Paul Fussell, a young American second lieutenant commanding a rifle platoon in France who was severely wounded in combat in the spring of 1945, concluded in his 1989 book Wartime, Understanding and Behavior in the Second World War, that no war could ever be judged a good war if one takes into account the full measure of pain and suffering it has produced. America, he wrote, has not yet truly understood what the Second World War was like. Whether or not they have arrived at a full understanding of the war's meaning, Americans certainly cannot be accused of having ignored the war in recent years. If anything, the farther the war has receded into the past, the greater the interest seems to have grown. In the years since this volume was first published in 1991, books about the war have crowded newspaper bestseller lists, websites devoted to the conflict have proliferated on the Internet, and movies about D-Day and Pearl Harbor have packed audiences into cineplexes. A museum devoted to the D-Day invasion opened in New Orleans, Louisiana, and tens of thousands of American tourists traveled to Normandy, France, to see the actual invasion beaches and to walk among the rows of crosses in the U.S. military cemetery on the grassy bluff overlooking Omaha Beach. HBO's popular miniseries Band of Brothers, released in 2001, is still regularly rebroadcast on television and has sold many thousands of DVD copies. As for cable TV's History Channel, as one historian noted, it seemed to live on Second World War film shot by U.S. Army Signal Corps combat photographers. Attention to the history of the war in the past 20 years was inspired in part by the 50th and 60th anniversary observances that rolled along at regular intervals. But the remembrances themselves were also tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that the World War II generation was itself fast disappearing from the scene, and with its demise the chances for the children and grandchildren of the veterans to express their gratitude would soon be over as well. These World War II veterans, now men and women in their 80s and 90s, were reportedly dying off at a rate of more than 1,100 every day, which meant that their annual mortality from natural causes was greater than the total U.S. combat deaths during the entire period of the war. Citing the need to act before the last of the participants were no longer alive to appreciate the gesture, Congress authorized the construction of the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., at a location on the Mall between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, the only 20th century event to be commemorated on the Mall's central axis. At the start of the 21st century, many Americans who had not been alive at the time of the war clearly found its memory a source of patriotic and personal inspiration. General Eisenhower's characterization of the war as a crusade seemed entirely apt to them. The wartime years, at least in retrospect, seemed to represent an era when moral and political choices were simpler and more satisfying than those offered to succeeding generations. The United States had gone to war in 1941 for the clearest of reasons. Its armed forces and national security were under attack from
Sample complete. Ready to continue?